Imagine walking into Nazi-occupied Europe with nothing but charm, courage, and a fake passport, and somehow walking out with the Gestapo chasing their own tails. That was Krystyna Skarbek, a name most people have never heard, but should. Before the war, she wasn't a spy, a soldier, or a killer. She was a Polish aristocrat, a beauty pageant contestant, a skier who could glide through blizzards like they were her playground. But when Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, she didn't run. She reinvented herself. She became Christine Granville, an undercover agent for Britain's SOE, the Special Operations Executive, the secret network that Churchill himself called Set Europe Ablaze. Her mission? Slip behind enemy lines, smuggle information, recruit spies, and maybe save her country. Within months, Krystyna became a ghost in the Nazi machine, crossing borders disguised as a journalist, sometimes as a refugee, sometimes even as a nun. And the crazy part? She carried her intelligence reports inside her ski poles. Literally, she hollowed them out to stash microfilm and maps. But this wasn't James Bond. This was real. And in the frozen wilderness between Hungary and Poland, one mistake meant a bullet in the head. And yet, Krystyna didn't just survive. She thrived. She talked her way past border guards, seduced enemy officers for intel, and convinced resistance fighters to trust her, even when no one trusted anyone. Soon, her name started spreading through the underground, not as a rumor, but as a legend. The Gestapo wanted her dead. The British wanted her back. And Churchill, well, Churchill called her one of the bravest women he'd ever met. But before she became Churchill's favorite spy, Krystyna had to face the one enemy no one could escape: betrayal. Because in the shadows of Nazi Europe, even the bravest hearts can be crushed by the ones they trust. By 1941, Krystyna Skarbek had become a ghost with a pulse. Everywhere the Nazis turned, she was 2 steps ahead, spreading intel, recruiting fighters, sabotaging supply lines. But ghosts only stay invisible for so long. Somewhere in the chaos of occupied France, a whisper reached the Gestapo. A woman, dark hair, fierce accent, always calm under pressure, was working for the British. And that whisper had a name: Christine Granville. Her cover was blown. And in the world of espionage, that's like hearing the clock start ticking down on your own life. The betrayal came from someone close, a local informant she'd trusted. He sold her name for a handful of money and a few promises. One morning, while meeting a courier in southern France, Krystyna walked straight into an ambush. The Gestapo surrounded her, guns drawn. No escape. She was thrown into a freezing cell in Dean Prison. No lawyer, no contact, no mercy. They tortured her, trying to break her, to make her name her handlers. But Krystyna Skarbek didn't break. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she looked her interrogator dead in the eye and said, "I have friends in high places. Kill me, and they'll kill you next." That wasn't a bluff. She really had connections within the French resistance and British command. Still, the Gestapo didn't believe her. Until, 2 days later, one of their officers turned up dead. Poisoned. Rumors spread that it was a message, a warning not to touch the lady spy. Krystyna used the fear to her advantage. She faked confidence so convincingly that even her captors began to doubt themselves. She whispered stories through her cell walls, rallying the prisoners. By the time her allies in the resistance stormed the town, the guards didn't even try to stop them. They opened the gates. Krystyna walked out, smiling, bruised, bloodied, but undefeated. The Gestapo had captured her, but she had captured their fear. And that, in espionage, is a far greater weapon than any gun. After escaping the Gestapo, Krystyna didn't hide. She could have gone underground, vanished, maybe even lived out the war in peace. But no, she ran straight back into the fire. By 1944, France was on the edge of liberation. Allied forces were pushing in from Normandy, and the resistance needed every ounce of help they could get. Krystyna joined a new mission in the Alps, to coordinate supply convoys and free Allied prisoners before the Germans could execute them. And this is where she went from spy to legend. One of her resistance contacts, Francis Kammerz, had been captured by the Gestapo and was hours away from being executed. He wasn't just any agent. He was a top Allied commander in the region. Krystyna knew if he died, the entire resistance network could collapse. So she did what no one else dared. She walked, alone, into Gestapo headquarters in the town of Digne, unarmed. Think about that. This is a woman who had already been tortured by them once, and now she's knocking on their door. She demanded to speak to the officer in charge. When they asked who she was, she simply said, "A British agent. And if you execute those prisoners, your whole command will burn." The Gestapo officer laughed, until Krystyna started naming names. She listed Gestapo agents who had already been assassinated by the resistance, information only an insider could possibly know. Then she offered a deal, a bribe, a large sum of money in exchange for their release. But really, it wasn't the money that swayed him. It was fear. Her calm, her confidence, her absolute certainty that she could destroy them if she wanted. Hours later, the officer handed her 3 prisoners, alive. Francis Kammerz and his men walked out, stunned. No bullets fired, no backup. Just one fearless woman and her voice. That single act not only saved their lives, it saved one of the most vital Allied resistance networks in southern France. When the news reached London, Churchill was told what she had done, and his words were short but unforgettable. She is one of the bravest women of the war.
When the war finally ended in 1945, the guns went silent. But for Krystyna Skarbek, the noise never stopped. She had survived everything: Nazis, betrayal, capture, torture. But what came next broke her in ways no interrogation ever could. The war heroes went home, to parades, medals, and promises. But spies? Spies didn't exist. Her missions were classified, her records sealed. No recognition, no pension, no future. The woman who had stared down the Gestapo was now reduced to taking jobs as a hotel maid and a stewardess on a cruise ship. And when she told people she'd once worked for Churchill, they laughed. They thought she was just another war story nobody believed. Still, Krystyna carried herself with that same quiet pride. Even broke, even forgotten, she walked like she still had a mission. But there was one more twist in her story, and it wasn't a mission she could escape. In 1952, while working on a ship in London, she met a man named Dennis Muldowney, a steward who became obsessed with her. When she rejected his advances, he snapped. One night, he waited outside her room with a knife. Krystyna, the woman who had faced Nazi guns without fear, was stabbed to death in a hallway of the Shelbourne Hotel. Her last words, whispered as she bled out, "I am so tired of being brave." She was buried in London under her wartime name, Christine Granville. Only a few people attended her funeral: former agents, 1 or 2 officers, and a handful of those whose lives she had saved. Years later, British intelligence finally declassified her missions, and the truth came out, that she had been one of the most effective spies in Churchill's entire network. The woman who once carried coded messages in her ski poles had changed the course of resistance history, and yet died alone, in silence.